You ever wonder how political parties can go from
climate change is the great moral challenge of our generation
to
The future gas strategy is about how gas fits within the principle of getting to net zero.
being the switchmen of history, public servants and senior advisors have played a surprisingly influential role in shaping policies and directions of our governments. Key in influencing climate policy in Australia is the institutional capture of the relevant bureaucracy by the fossil fuel industry, specifically at the CSIRO, or the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, an organisation seemingly at the forefront of climate change related research in this country and heralded for its credibility. The 1997 Kyoto Summit was one of the many international pledges to reduce global CO2 emissions. However, in Australia, these pledges meant little to John Howard's Liberal government, given climate and resource policy was often directly influenced by a group of fossil fuel lobbyists who referred to themselves as the
Greenhouse Mafia.
Yes, this is real. According to a Liberal Party insider study interviewing a bunch of elite heads of interest groups, the fossil fuel lobby had unparalleled access to ministers and policy making, to the point where they'd be literally writing the laws.
That it won't reduce carbon emissions. Is that right? What are they?
Numerous documented instances of this greenhouse mafia censoring and pressuring scientists at the CSIRO regarding climate research created a culture of fear surrounding said climate research. Although Rudd and Labour were rhetorically more committed to climate action, this greenhouse mafia still ran important sections of the government. If you look at Resources Minister Martin Ferguson, his principal policy advisor and Chief of Staff Tracy Winters was a former Chevron and Woodside employee.
Thank you for helping out regional communities drink water and coal from the same tap.
All over the government's highest consultative committees on energy were the execs of fossil fuel companies, the very people who subscribed to the greenhouse mafia. Julia Gillard followed suit, specifically founding within the CSIRO, GISERO, or the Gas Industry Social and Environmental Research Alliance. The new body was headed by Megan Clark, who's worked at Western Mining Limited and as Vice President at BHP, and Paige Maxson, former Director at Australia Pacific LNG. In illustrating just how pervasive the greenhouse mafia was within both political parties, the Liberal Party insider who first broke the story, Guy Pearce, quipped in 2009, when Woodside's Liberal-leaning lobbyist called John Howard's Environment Minister, it was the former Chief of Staff of that office on the line. When Woodside's Labour-leaning lobbyist rang, it was the former Secretary of the Labour Party.
You can have as many euphemisms as you want. You can call it donations, you can call it contributing, you can call it participating in democracy. That's all shit. This is one thing and one thing only. It's pay to play.
The election of Tony Abbott's Liberal National Coalition on the 7th of September 2013 was a major turning point for the CSIRO. As per his predecessors, Abbott's Resources Minister Ian Macfarlane, who had directly collaborative relationships with the greenhouse mafia under the Howard government, had an office stacked with representatives from the fossil fuel industry. His Chief of Staff, for example, Sarah McNamara, had previously worked as the Head of Government Affairs with AGL Energy. Abbott himself appointed public climate deniers Maurice Newman and Nick Warburton as top prime ministerial advisors. As early as November 8, 2013, Abbott sacked 1,400 CSIRO workers, or a quarter of the research body's workforce, and abolished the Climate Change Commission. By the end of 2014, the CSIRO's budget was again slashed by $110 million, depleting the workforce by another 20%. Conversely, his government poured tens of billions into coal and gas projects. He also completely defunded various environmental justice groups, abolished the Australia Renewable Energy Agency and the Climate Change Authority, and restricted the ability for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to invest in renewables. This is all to say that any sections of the bureaucracy and government that were interested in climate action were quickly being reconfigured to expand the influence of the fossil fuel industry. Abbott's soldiers were rewarded handsomely.
Remember, for Groom in his time as Minister, in his time as minister reborn, as it were, and I hope that the sector will acknowledge and demonstrate their gratitude to him.
Ian McFarlane was given a job as Chief Executive at the Queensland Resources Council. Barry O'Sullivan's New Lands Group Holdings has dealt with energy giants like Origin. Assistant Defence Minister Stuart Robert oversaw a deal between China and Nimrod Resources while having shares in Medalum Holdings, a company with financial interests in Nimrod, and former Vice President of the Liberal Party Santo Santaro became Director of Sanlam. After Abbott lost the leadership, Malcolm Turnbull's government in November 2015 awarded the more compliant CSIRO with $90 million out of the $1.1 billion National Innovation and Science Agenda to develop a cashed-up innovation fund to help it co-invest in new companies and existing startups. Leaked emails confirmed that the executives of the CSIRO were planning to cut up to 120 mainly climate-related positions in November 2015, because research for the public good is not good enough, it needs to be linked to jobs and growth. The cull would allow for a clean cut in terms of eliminating all capability associated with public good/government funded climate research. Later that year, the Turnbull government announced funding cuts that would amount to 350 scientific, mainly climate related, jobs from the CSIRO. Under Turnbull and the CSIRO CEO Larry Marshall, the CSIRO became an annual subscriber to the Minerals Council, stripped climate scientists from their jobs in the name of commercialization, and commissioned a dense report, Oil and Gas: A Roadmap for Unlocking Future Growth Opportunities for Australia, where it advised the gas industry on how it can remain a viable competitor in the face of rising renewable energy, and urged that the gas industry must act lest a rapid decarbonisation of the energy sector completely undermine the ostensible role of gas as a bridge to a zero-carbon future, a potentially larger risk for the Australian gas export industry.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the gas corporations?
Sound familiar? Here is where hegemony is cemented, whereby even the CSIRO's own experts, the ones previously being censored, are now writing puff pieces for the fossil fuel industry. I mean, we know what ScoMo thought about fossil fuels.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal.
But importantly, under his gas-fired recovery plan, GESERA received a record funding boost, which contributed to exploration in the Canning Basin region, 5 new projects in the Northern Territory's Beetaloo Sub-Basin, and 4 new projects in South Australia's Limestone Coast region. GESERA was also instrumental in the $226 million subsidy to the gas industry to develop projects in the Beetaloo Basin that would otherwise not be commercially viable. More notably, a GESERA study funded mostly by Origin Energy found that in Queensland, fracking was actually relatively environmentally sound. Yes, you heard it. Yes, this was based off the analysis of 6 gas wells out of the 19,000 wells in the state. Origin also gave the researchers $400,000 in kind contributions. This is the kind of sham industry-sponsored research that informs the opinions of bureaucrats and politicians, that shapes the narrative within the government, that informs opinions like this.
The future gas strategy is about how gas fits within the principle of getting to net zero.
Today, GESERA's director Damien Barrett has worked in the Australian Coal Association research program and in major mining companies. Director Linda Stalker in Western Australia has worked for Statoil, and Queensland and Northern Territory Director Cameron Huddlestone Holmes leads multi-million-dollar shale and gas expeditions into the Beetaloo Basin, in particular publishing a report that concluded that the basin would be carbon neutral through 156 million carbon offsets yearly. For context, Australia generated 127 million carbon offsets in total since 2012. Maybe you'd point out that focusing on GESERA is an unfair characterization of the entire CSIRO. Well, of the 8 board members of the CSIRO, Catherine Farge has worked for ExxonMobil, David Knox has worked for BP, Arco and Shell, and Ian McFarlane, yes the same Ian McFarlane, is the executive of the Queensland Resources Council and Woodside, and the former Resources Minister for the government, known for the largest funding cuts to the CSIRO in history. Of the 8 on the executive team, Executive Director for the Environment, Energy and Resources Peter Mayfield and Kirsten Rose both worked at BHP. Looking at the CSIRO's $90 million towards net zero mission, it says nothing about renewables, but it does say it will work to expand Australia's carbon offset capacity by using and scaling negative emission technologies such as carbon sequestration.
TLDR, carbon sequestration sucks.
Again, a very familiar sentiment. While still enacting vital climate and renewable research, the CSIRO has been effectively co-opted by the fossil fuel and mining industry. It uses an internationally recognized and accredited institution, much of which is government funded, to research and justify new, cutting-edge and lucrative fossil fuel exploration, extraction and projects. The fact that multiple executives on the CSIRO are known and public climate deniers is very revealing. Like how the realists influenced the Fraser and Hawke government's transformative economic change in the 70s and 80s, the scientists and management at the CSIRO have influenced and in some cases dictated the greenwashing of the fossil fuel industry by the federal Australian government. Evidently, the Australian government for decades has acted as an instrument to fossil fuel capital, where first they brazenly abuse their high influence within the government, cabinet and committees, and now where they embed institutionally a narrative that portrays fossil fuel capital as the gateway to addressing the very problem they profit from exacerbating.